Hello and welcome. It's Francis here. Thank you for coming back to my channel. If this is your first time here, I bid thee welcome. There is a subscribe button below if you would like to support this channel by subscribing. Also a bell to be notified as to when I upload more content. I'm coming to you from Ghana country, and as such, I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of the land upon which I reside. So in this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about International Women's Day, which is coming up on the 8th of March. And I'm holding an online event on that same day in the morning. And I'll talk about that in a little while. But I just want to sort of like give some background to International Women's Day because it's quite interesting. And the very first day was marked back on the 19th of March in 1911. We're over 1 million people from Austria-Hungary at the time. Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland protested or marked this day. And this originated from the labor movements across Europe and also in the United States of America on issues that still continue today, where there was a focus on gender equality or inequality, as the case may be, reproductive rights, as well as the violence and abuse against women. Now, prior to this, in 1909, there was a Women's Day organized in New York City by the Socialist Party of America. And this event was conceived by an activist by the name of Teresa, I think it's called Markle. And before people start getting excited as to men's rights and why there's no International Men's Day, there are some sobering thoughts that I actually discovered when researching this for my presentation, that hence this is the reason behind this video. And one of these sobering thoughts is there seems to be a long history of inequality between the genders. And when we're looking at this, the large majority of the equality tends to tip in favor of men. Why this is the case, I have no idea. I'm not a student of gender studies. I just have an interest in mythology, and also being a woman, have an interest in, why do we always sort of come off second hand? But we can certainly make assertions. And when we look back throughout history, it is interesting that even, let's say, within the feminist cycles, they talk about a matrifocal society. How long back we have to look to actually find a true matrifocal society where the focus is around the divine feminine, as opposed to the patriarchal society that we're familiar with today, when the focus is around largely the male. And some of the ancient cultures, I said, have rendered some interesting interpretations. Then again, this could be because the majority of archaeologists and writers of certain eras have largely been male. So they're seeing things through men's perspectives. And this is something that, if I can pull it out of my bookshelf, Jaya Gebrotis wrote about when she was looking and unearthed all the goddess statues or ancient goddess statues throughout Western Europe, Eastern Europe, was that a lot of these were overlooked because men were, or the male archaeologists, I should say, were dismissing them. While she found a huge number of these statues, and that sort of brought the role of women or females more to the forefront, but we still sort of dismiss it. However, it's interesting to note that ancient Egypt acknowledged the feminine and even had a matriarchal line through which property in particular was descended through the women and both through the men. And if we go back to times of ancient Babylonia and Sumer, women were able to buy and sell property, inherit property, engage in commerce and the like. There was no sort of gender bias there. But within ancient Greek culture, This is where we find a huge divide between the genders, with women lacking both political and equal rights, which steadily the lacking increased over time, so their rights decreased until classical times, where women were either under the guardianship of their father until they were married, and once they were married, they became under the guardianship of their husband. And this is something we see today in marriage ceremonies in particular, where a woman is given away either by her father or someone who stepped into that role, and she's given away like a piece of property to the man who is about to come or become her husband. In classical Greece, women were banned from being poets and artists, scholars, politicians. And what surprised me was the attitude of philosopher Aristotle towards women, because he thought that they would bring disorder and evil. And as such, he considered it best for them to be kept separate from society. Charming. And then under Roman law, women had no public voice, no public role. They were best not seen, and even better, not heard. And because ancient Roman and ancient Greek society and thought has greatly influenced our Western society, and Roman law, Christianity, the Catholic Church in particular, this has filtered through. However, it wasn't just in the West. Even in China, there's a Confucian law that promotes the three obediences, where a woman, or a daughter in particular, there's no mention of a son, but a daughter was to obey their father, where wives had to obey their husband, and a widow had to obey their son. So if we're looking historically, apart from the ancient Egyptians, it was only really in the Viking Age where women from Nordic countries, being Sweden, Denmark, Norway in particular, were actually recorded of having a relatively free status, where they had the right to inherit property, to hold positions of power, and where unmarried women also had rights to decide on where their place of residence would be. And I know a lot of sort of like feminists and goddess followers today sort of limit themselves to the witch trials of the 16th to 17th century. That's the peak, but the witch trials actually really started centuries before that. And the witch trials was the point of the oppression of women. As we can see, this has started happening many thousands of years before the 16th, 17th century. However, I do believe that the witch trials, in particular the church opinion and the hymn of the witches, the Natus Maleficarum, where witches, or women in particular, were evil and more sort of easily led to become witches and to enter into pacts with the devil, was certainly fuel added to a long burning fire. And over time, there has been people writing about this. In 1792, Mary Wollstonecraft, who is a British writer and philosopher, probably better known as being the mother of Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. However, Wollstonecraft published a pamphlet or a booklet called The Vindication of the Rights of Women, where she attacked gender oppression and argued that women are not naturally inferior to men, but appeared to be so because they lacked education. Basically throwing the ball back into the men's court because they refused education to women. After this, in 1799, another Mary, this time Mary Robinson, wrote a letter to the women of England on the injustice of mental subordination. And she wrote this under a pseudonym, Anne Frances Riddell, where she debunked the myth of the woman writer as an unsexed female, promoting the figure as a masculine woman or as a woman of enlightened understanding. So she wasn't an unsexed female and a masculine woman. A writer woman was a woman of enlightened understanding. Just as well because I'm a writer myself and I would hate to think that I'm an unsexed female or even a masculine male. And this view of womanhood, and this is the whole thing that's like, there's a lot of discussion as to what makes a woman, and that continues today as well. But in 1869, we have English philosopher and political theorist John Stuart Mill adding to this discussion in his essay, The Subjugation of Women, where he wrote, "We are continually told that civilization and Christianity have restored to the woman her just rights. Meanwhile, the wife is the actual bondservant to her husband, no less so far as the legal obligation goes than slaves commonly so called." So basically he's saying, because this is coming towards the end of the slave trade, that a married woman was a slave to her husband. Sort of fast forwarding a bit more into the modern era in the 19th century, where husbands were still able to control most of their wives' property, even if they married into a family where their wife sort of had inherited property that then upon marriage became the property of the husband. Until 1870, where the English Married Women's Property Acts came into force, and this established that a woman's wages and her property from her own work, or the inheritance that she obtained, was her separate property. And then a few years later, or 12 years later, in 1882, there was an amendment which made a woman a separate legal identity to her husband. Because up to then, again, she seemed to be just another piece of property, a chattel to her husband. More recent times, to bring this into the 20th century, up until the 1970s, there was something called a marriage bar. And this marriage bar was once a woman got married, and this was something that all women were encouraged to do up until the 70s. This is what was expected of us. Once she got married, she had to terminate her employment, especially if she was in the teaching or clerical professions, which is rather ironic considering these are the two professions that even today are more attractive or accessible. Well, women are being encouraged to enter more than men. You find more women in teaching and clerical professions than you see men. And it also stated that up until that time, if a woman then later became widowed and she had children, and regardless of the age of the children, she was still considered to be a married woman, therefore prevented from entering the workplace. And I mention these because all of this has an impact on the status of women today, where there is still a huge sort of disparity between wages, superannuation, when women which is based here in Australia, is based on what you earn. If you take time off, like women do because they have children and they tend to be still the primary caregivers, you're not earning superannuation. So women's superannuation is less. And then you've got less wages because it's based on percentage of your wages that you've earned. So when a woman retires, she has less superannuation to retire on. And I also find it interesting that here in the 21st century, we are still fighting for the same things that the women back in 1911 on the first International Women's Day were focusing on. Over 100 years ago, we were still calling for equal rights. We are still calling for reproductive rights. We are still calling for the cessation of the abuse and the violence against women. Not saying that this doesn't happen against men, just saying, especially here in Australia, there almost seems to be a pandemic, and some people even say it's femicide. That's how women are treated, how many women are being murdered and killed by their partner. And this is something even just the other week. I was catching the train from the city back home, and I don't know the backstory, but all I saw was this Raja, tall, large, stocky guy being followed by, I think, both a driver and a security man. He came up to a younger woman on the train, and obviously they were, may have been in a relationship. They'd separated, and he was about to hit her in the carriage. And that made a lot of us feel very uncomfortable. I was glad that the security guy was there, but then the guy was taking swings at the security guy as well. Now, I don't know. There's a whole lot of backstory to this too, so we're not going to jump down that avenue. But this sort of highlighted, just first and foremost for me, that violence against women is not something that's behind closed doors, hidden out of sight. It can be in the open. And it goes beyond just the physical violence. We're also talking about emotional, sexual violence there, but psychological violence as well. And even things like pulling a woman's hair, crossing her boundaries. Yeah, it's really interesting when you sort of step back and have that in your mind and look back as to how women are treated in general. And that sort of like highlights things. Anyway, I'm jumping down a rabbit hole, but what I wanted to share with you is a little bit about this event that I'm going to be running on the 8th of March if you're interested. So basically, you just come down to mysticalsoulacademy.com, scroll down the page till you come to what I'm offering and go into the power of the feminine divine. And you will be taken to a spiritual event, as I said, that I'm doing for International Women's Day. It's going to be online. So it'll be taking place at 8 a.m. Australian Central Daylight Time, which works out to, and I've even worked out sometimes here, 1:30 p.m. in Los Angeles the day before on the Friday, 4:30 New York, and 9:30 London time, or on the 7th, which is the Friday. Well, I'm doing it here on the 8th, on the Saturday. So I am offering, charging, say, $25, which works out to be about $16 US, which is going to be donated to Women's Safety Services South Australia, or WSSA, which is a South Australian organisation that supports women and their children who have been experiencing domestic and family violence, because there is a shortage of facilities there as well. So what we're going to be doing, it's sort of paying homage to the suffragette movement and acknowledging those brave women who demanded the right to vote, because it's still, I know, mind-boggling, especially when you come to elections and people don't want to vote, that really women have only had the right to vote in just over 100 years. And these women, these suffragettes who were protesting, especially in England, a lot of them lost their lives as well. There was waterboarding. There's a whole lot of horrendous actions taken by men. And I don't want to sort of put all men in the same basket, but these were some men in the society's positions of power. And it gets me thinking, why? Why are men so afraid of women's power? So we're going to acknowledge those brave women who sort of like brought this to the forefront, really put their lives on the line, and the majority of them also lost their lives. We will sort of honor the modern day feminine warriors who stand up for their truth amongst diversity. And in particular, a more recent one that's coming to mind is the Mexican, is she a president or is she a prime minister? I think she's the president, how she's standing up to her American counterpart. very eloquently as well. We're going to be sharing some sacred myths around the world that contain female movers and shakers who express their feminine strength as well. We're going to sort of end with a bit of chanting, in particular the Gayatri mantra, which to me is an embodiment or a really good way to sort of connect in with our heart center, so the divine feminine lies as well, and take a journey to the essence of our own seed of self-empowerment. So this isn't just directed at women. Men can also attend. In fact, I would encourage men to attend because we need to sort of raise this imbalance again. And I do have sort of swaying towards Jungian philosophy, where he talks about the anima and animus, that we all have the aspect of the other within us. So within every man, there's a female aspect, and within every woman, there is a masculine aspect as well, a bit like the Taoist symbol of yin yang, dark side of the mountain, light side of the mountain. And I think too, for men, in gaining a bit of an understanding as to how women have been treated in the past, men can then look to becoming hopefully role models for the men to come, for their sons, for their nephews, to stand up and to really support women. This is what it's all about, because we have been fighting this battle for so long now that we are tired because nothing's getting done. And it's not about taking power away from men. We've got to get our whole heads out of that. It's a patriarchal idealism that in order for one group or person to rise up, that will mean that you deplete the power of somebody else. It's not that. It's about becoming an equal playing field. It's about acknowledging and working with the gifts and contributions that we all can play to create a better world for everyone, because we all exist in the same space, creating a better space. So when men can start calling out their mates for sexist, misogynist behavior, the ill treatment of women, when they can be seen as the concept of guardian and protector, but not sort of like stranglehold of women. And this is something that in Indigenous communities and cultures, when it came to, say, women's business and men's business, for women to sort of like do their business, the men often were the space holders or protecting the space so women could go about and doing their thing. So that was the role of the man. The woman was the creative force, because after all, she brings forth the child. But it was the man who held the space to enable her to bring that into fruition. And this is something, especially if we've got a rise in toxic masculinity, toxic male influences. I'm not going to mention names, but I think we all sort of know who I'm talking about, who, and that whole mindset is like, it's sort of, again, we have these, it's just, we're not getting very far. I said it's really sad that since 1911, here we are in 2025, women are still fighting for their own reproductive rights. And honestly, it's getting worse. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole there. So if you are interested and want to learn a little bit more, Power of the Feminine Divine, it's on mysticalsoulacademy.com. I said it's on the 8th of March. And there's the times there, the $25 Australian. I said that works to about, I think about $16 US. I'm not quite sure what it is in English pounds. It will be recorded. So if you signed up and you can't attend, you'll be sent the recording. And also it is, I guess, a bit of a fundraiser for WASA here in South Australia. Now, what I found interesting is here in Australia, South Australia, at our museum, there was an exhibition. I think it's still happening. There's the Mexican president, radical textiles or something, and this textile was up. I can't believe I still have to protest this shit. And that's, I think, is what a lot of women, I suppose, of a certain age, the movers and shakers of the 70s, of the women's movement, we are going backwards. Really, men, why are you so afraid of us? I know it's a big rabbit hole to go down. All we're asking is that we don't want to compete. We just want to be included. We just would like to be valued, see more than a breeding cow or anything else like that. So, yeah, I'm gonna get off my soapbox now. And if you are interested, I hope to see you on the 8th of March. If you are not able to attend or not interested in attend, I hope when International Women's Day comes around in your neck of the world that you acknowledge it in some way. Think about the women in your life. Think about we all come from a mother. We all have sisters or cousins or nieces. May have been like a female teacher or the I know shopkeeper, the woman down the road, something. There are, is it half the population? Over half the population is actually female. Um, and I know in some circles people might say, women pamper yourself. Well, that's all well and good, but when we're still fighting for equality, um, still our voices are still not being heard, where women are being dismissed when they go to the medical professionals, complaining about aches and pains. And it has been proven that men will tend to get diagnosed quicker than women. Even women, how we treat our sisters, we have this sort of very competitive bitchiness. Instead of supporting our sisters, we like to chop them off at the knees. Again, this is patriarchal mindset, which goes beyond gender. And then I said, when we're talking about the transgender community, there's always discussions around what makes a woman a woman. We really hear by comparison what makes a man a man. So there's lots of discussions out there. So if you aren't part of a community or not doing an event, just maybe spend some time coming to your heart center and connecting with the divine feminine within you. All have it. Blessings.